As I said before, our ability to function abroad in part depends upon our ability to continue to be successful here at home. So we have the focus, but we also have the capacity. And what worries me is we're not succeeding here at home. And this is not an argument that America is in decline, because we're not. But to say that does not mean that we're not underachieving or underperforming. Of course we are. We're growing at a half to two-thirds the historic rate of post-World War II economic growth. You've had tremendous stagnation of incomes for large swaths of America. Long-term unemployment is now, alas, a widespread phenomenon. I have to be careful. Very few people come to the United States to go to our K-12 schools. A few do. But the lion's share of those who line up at our consulates and embassies around the world do so to come to Princeton and Harvard, not to PS this or that in New York. We've seen several bridges collapse in the last few weeks. That's part of a much larger problem. If you've recently been to any airport in the New York metropolitan area, you've taken the Acela to Washington, I need say no more. We do not have a first world infrastructure. And that significantly detracts from our competitiveness. It's a major sponge of time, a source of inefficiency. It also, by the way, leaves us much more vulnerable to either natural disruption or terrorism, because we don't have the resilience in our society that we need to do. I could go on and on, but what we're doing is essentially we've become much less competitive than we ought to be. We're spending 18% of our GDP on healthcare, twice what the OECD average is, without outcomes in any way that are proportionate to it. And we're once again in a position where it's a question of when and not if, unless something dramatic is done, we're going to run up a massive degree of debt and vulnerability. And you can't fix that, by the way, on a dime. It's a little bit like a supertanker. You don't make sudden stops and starts with supertankers. The same thing is true of entitlements. In order to fix things 10 and 15 years hence, you've got to make the decisions now. You can't do it when someone is in their mid-60s and suddenly say, oh, by the way, we're going to change the rules of the game and the retirement age is going to change. That's Lucy in the football. You've got to do it now, 10 or 15 years ahead. And alas, we're not. If anything, the CBO report that came out a couple of weeks ago has taken the pressure off. Ironically, so has the results of the sequester. I actually believe the United States has a bit of time and space to devote a greater proportion of its resources here domestically. If we invest intelligently in our human and physical base here at home, that will position us to do more in the world down the road, either to discourage the emergence of a so-called great power rival, peer competitor, or to deal with one if it happens all the same. So this is, it's not a withdrawal from the world, and it's not a moving away from the responsibilities of national security, but again, it's looking at this strategic picture now for the foreseeable future, saying, hey, we have a bit of time and space. We need to restore the foundations of our strength, and if we do that, by the way, we'll be much better positioned to play a leading role in the 21st century. And I think that is essential. But the defining challenges of this century are going to be things like proliferation. They are going to be things like climate change. They are going to be things like regulating the new domain of cyberspace, about what to do about potentially pandemic flus or other diseases, about keeping an operating, functioning world economic order, trade, investment, finance. It isn't just going to happen by itself. And the Indians are not going to make it happen, and the Japanese aren't, and the Europeans aren't, and the Chinese aren't. And unless the United States plays this role, it isn't going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it's bad for the 7 billion out there. It's bad for the 300 million plus here. So it seems to me the stakes are large. The good news is we have the opportunity, I still think, to get it right. And the not so good news is it's not so clear we're going to use that opportunity.